welcome everybody. We're just getting started here and folks are just starting to jump in. So first, I want to thank you all for attending today. I was just talking to Erica a moment ago about, for me, the realization that there are so many teachers looking to move out of teaching and into e-learning and instructional design is something that really only hit my radar within the last 6 months or so. So I have been so joyed and overwhelmed by the reaction that I've received from people about this session. So first, I want to welcome Erica and welcome everybody. Real quickly, before I let Erica introduce herself, one thing I always like to tell people is this session and all of the sessions that I do are totally unstructured. Like we have no pre-planned content or anything like that. Erica and I will obviously be talking and sharing our stories, but really what we talk about is going to be directed by you. So you'll see in the chat panel, I have a pinned a message to encourage you to submit your questions. You can submit them in chat if you want to, but what would be really awesome is to the right of the chat tab, there is a questions bubble with a little question mark. Put your questions there. That way other people can upvote on them. And then as we answer them, those our responses will get bookmarked for people who watch the recording later. So while you submit your questions, Erica, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this with me. And tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living, and then we'll talk a little bit about your transition.
Sure. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me to host this with you. I love being able to take the opportunity to talk with other teachers looking to transition. So I am a senior instructional designer. I made the transition in October after spending about 13 years in public education and some higher ed work. So I have a lot, it's still fresh in my memory going through it all. Like around this time last year, I was very deep into trying to figure it out. Like, what do I need to do? It was really confusing. It was overwhelming because there are certain steps you need to do, but if you don't know where to start. And I didn't know where to start at all. But I was a Spanish and ELL teacher for a long time. And then just before I made the transition for a few years, I was also an instructional coach, and I had the opportunity of being on this team where we were designing all the professional development in our district. So I had some experience with instructional design for adult learners. And I learned about instructional design through a master's program when I was trying to get a license. And the program was really heavily focused on instructional design, but it was more for getting a license in educational technology. Mm-hmm. And one of my professors was from the corporate world. And it was just like, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's where I want to go. So, and that was 3 years ago. So it took me 3 years of courage to make that leap. And I can tell you all about it.
Yeah, we have some questions about that, about how long it took to make that leap. Well, so October was like yesterday that you made the leap. So, yeah. I mean, so how, if you were to look back on it retrospectively, I don't know, like, would you have done anything differently? Is or is there something you wish you knew like now, then in October, or even before then that you know now? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So like I say 3 years ago, I knew, but I didn't actually work towards it because like I was afraid, one, and two, I didn't know where to start. I was really overwhelmed. So I just kind of set it on the back burner and let it sit there. And then, the summer of 2019, I tried, but I didn't do the right things. I didn't have my portfolio. I didn't know how to network. I didn't realize how important being on LinkedIn was and networking. And that is probably the most important thing I did. Was I was connecting with people and then found people who lifted me up, basically, who really supported me and helped focus me. And I wish I had known that sooner. Like, reach out to people. People are so kind and generous in this field, and especially on LinkedIn. And I had some amazing mentors throughout this process that helped me get to where I am, that helped me see my value and worth, that I can do this, that I do have skills that I can bring to the table, and and also help me identify where I need to upskill, where I need to like learn, because there is learning that needs to be done. It's work. But having someone guide me through the process and helping me identify what I need to work on and where I need to go was key. Like, find your people
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things, and we'll talk more about that. I assume we'll have some questions about that. What I find most interesting about our industry, and this took me a long time to understand as well, is that our industry, when I say our industry, I'm talking about learning in general, instructional design, e-learning, whatever role you play within our industry. I find it so fascinating how diverse it is in terms of the backgrounds. And, for me, for those of you who don't know my story, I don't have a background in teaching or education or anything like that. I fell into instructional design and e-learning while I was working in retail loss prevention, catching shoplifters. I have a background in criminal justice, and I used to literally sit in a little camera room and catch shoplifters. And it was through that somebody said, "Hey, you're good at catching shoplifters. We have a role in the corporate office to train others how to catch shoplifters." And what I find interesting about the dynamic between your story and my story is I took a training role thinking it was going to advance my loss prevention career because it was a training role in loss prevention. I had no plans whatsoever on getting into e-learning or instructional design. And it was only once I got into it, I realized, oh gosh, I think I like this.
Yeah.
But everything you went through with that, like probably a lot of imposter syndrom and lack of confidence.
Every day still.
Right. Oh yeah, me too. I totally have
You're
it
gonna
too.
figure me out.
But I feel like maybe I was a bit more fortunate because I went into it ignorantly thinking this was advancing one part of my career. And I went through the whole career identity crisis once I was already in it. And I wasn't sure if I was qualified to continue in it. Whereas you identified what it was before you were in it, and you had to figure out, okay, well, how do I move myself from point A to point B to get into it, right?
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating. So,
yeah.
Well, good. Well, let's go ahead and we already have 11 questions in the questions pod.
Gosh,
That's awesome. For those of you who maybe have just joined us, you might have missed my message a moment ago. You'll see there's in the chat panel a little pinned message from me. We're going to be answering questions from the little questions tab, which is to the right of the tab, the chat tab, and you can upvote on other people's questions. So go ahead and submit those there. Let's go ahead and I'm going to check out our first question here. Let's see. Okay, so our first question is from Priscilla Chinchilla. Awesome name, Priscilla. I see you on LinkedIn all the time, and your name always stands out to me. Okay, so let me record the answer. So Priscilla wants to know, I've had multiple recruiters mention that they were unsure of me as an ID because I've only worked in the public sector and not private. What would you say to those recruiters doubting your abilities? I love that question. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you as the teacher are going to really have to sell yourself and convince them that you can be an instructional designer. And I found that one way I was able to do that was speaking their language. I started off like the terms I was using. There is a lot of transferable stuff that we do as teachers that can transfer into the corporate world. And you did a really great video and blog post recently, Tim, about that it talked about this. And I thought that was perfect. But we call them different things in education than they do in corporate. So once I realized that I wasn't speaking their language, and I did this like keyword search and tried to figure out what do they call things, and I looked at all the stuff that was there and I was like, yep, I do that, but I call it this. And then once I was able to confidently speak their language, and confidence it's not my natural suit. I really had to practice it. I felt like I was getting a little bit further beyond the recruiter at that point. But yeah, you will get a lot of people wondering, can you do it? And I think teachers definitely have the ability. You have the grit, you have the drive, especially if you're looking to make this career leap. Like, it's a lot of work. And teaching is hard. So if you can
Mhm.
relate the things that you're doing in teaching, like how you work with multiple stakeholders and, time management and making those deadlines, like we have deadlines multiple times a day as a teacher, like you just cannot push those, like you just do it and you explain, how you just make things happen. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I was telling you before we started the session today about how earlier last year there's a teacher that lives here locally in the Phoenix area that I had been going to lunch to and chatting with and giving some advice to, and she kept telling me about what she does every day, and that's when it clicked in my mind. I was like, oh, you're doing the same things, you're just using different words. And so I
Yeah.
told her, I'm like, rather than lesson planning, say curriculum development, or rather than, meeting with counselors and principals and assistant principals, you're meeting with stakeholders. And that kind of, verbal jujitsu that you have to do, if you will, you know,
Hmm.
getting it really, you're just having to get past that recruiter, and the recruiter doesn't know any better than you do. They're just looking for keywords as well,
Yeah.
because they're not experts in learning or any of the roles that they hire for, and so they just want to know: do you have the awareness of what we do in this organization? And the other thing I was going to mention along those lines is one of the things you're up against, and I mentioned this in the blog post that you mentioned, Erica. Thank you for that. Is that in the corporate world, and I'm guilty of this. My career has been always in the corporate world. If you've never worked in a classroom before, as a corporate person or a non-teacher, you have no idea what teachers do all day, and so it's
Yeah.
easy for us to just assume, literally, that you're babysitting people's children and making macaroni all day.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not true, but that's some of the preconceptions you're up against.
Yeah.
And so figuring out how to translate that language is incredibly
And like
important.
all of us have gone through the education system, unless you were
Yeah,
homeschooled,
right,
right?
right.
So we have an idea. I mean, when I was going through school a long time ago, let's just say that, it's very different than the way we do school today. And so they
Hmm.
don't quite understand. It's not so much, that sage on the stage just talking at students anymore. There's a lot of educational research out there about best practices and changing it up and making it more student-centered, proficiency-based, that kind of stuff that really translates into how the corporate world wants training to be done. And
Yep.
you just have to think about those connections.
Like even you just saying right now, student centered. All you have to do is say learner centered, and you're
Yeah.
already speaking corporate
Yeah.
language.
Yes.
Instead of
Yeah.
teacher, you could use facilitator. It's the same thing. They're
Yeah.
just different words.
Yep.
Um, and so, yeah, and that takes practice. That's a mind shift
It
you
is a
have to
mind.
make, and you don't want
Yeah.
to be dishonest. You just want to be you're catering
Right.
to their vernacular.
Right.
I love that.
Exactly.
Well,
Yep.
okay, cool. Hey, by the way, real quickly, I have this smoothie here that I'm not going to ignore, so I'm going to drink from it if you guys don't mind. So, okay.
Go for it. We support smoothies.
Thank you. It's still early here on the West Coast. Okay, let's do another question. And for those of you just joining us again, we're answering the questions from the questions tab, which is to the right of the chat tab. You can upvote questions. So I'm looking at those. So if I'm missing anything in chat, I apologize. I'll try to toggle back and forth. All right, so our next question, Justine Mayberry. Hi, Justine. Justine wants to know, how long was your transition process from start to finish? You talked a little bit about this one, Erica, but go ahead and give this, if you want to give a little bit more color to the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give more context. When I was really seriously pursuing instructional design, like I said, I knew I wanted to do it about 3 years ago. I sat on it. I tried one summer, but I didn't have the right focus. I didn't have the right stuff. So about this time last year, COVID hit, and that's when I was like, oh boy, it's time to go. I knew, like, okay, I got to really take this seriously and I got to figure out what I'm doing. So I probably started in like May last year-ish. And I started kind of from zero as far as what my resume looked like. My portfolio wasn't up yet. I had pieces. I just didn't have any. I just didn't have a place to put it.
Mhm.
And really understanding how the application process works in the corporate world, because it's so different than the education, so different. So I'd say from like May, and then I started my job that I have now in late October. Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to go back, like what was the number one mistake that you made that maybe you didn't realize you were making a mistake, but now you realize, oh gosh, that was the big issue for me.
Yeah, I'd say two things. You have to have a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
That is a must, and the portfolio um, needs to be clean, needs to be modern looking, needs to, have a few samples of things. Don't put everything in the kitchen sink in there,
Yep.
because they're not going to see it. But put your pieces that you want people to see front and center, that really shows off your skills. And the resume, I went in with like this pretty looking resume thinking I had it, and then I learned about the automated system.
Yep.
And I was like, what is this? Like the ATS, it's basically, you have to get past the robot
Mm-hmm.
sometimes first
Yep.
to get into the recruiter's lap. And
Yep.
so I pared down my resume to be very simple, black and white, nothing fancy. And then I did that keyword search of like, I need to make sure I'm speaking their language, that the things I'm saying in my resume reflect the job post that they're asking for, that I can match those skills.
Yep.
So it was a lot of really self-evaluating and looking at what I had already and trying to just like make it more presentable for the corporate world, because it was so very teacher. Like I took out a lot of things in my resume, like a lot, and I only ended up with things that actually pertain to instructional design, or me being able to manage projects or things like that. Like there was a ton more I did, but I took it all out because one, it made my resume really, really long and nobody's going to read that. And
Mm-hmm.
two, they're looking for very specific things. You want to throw that in their face.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep.
um, yeah,
So
yeah,
it was really focusing on your portfolio and resume. That was what you would have gone back to
yeah,
differently. Got it.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'd love to talk quickly, and I know there's a couple questions about portfolios, but I'm going to do a quick, tiny little plug here. Actually, next week, this time, I'm doing a session on how to build your portfolio with Ashley Chasson. So I'm going to put the link to that in chat for anyone who wants to attend that webinar. Let me find it real quickly. Here it is. Okay. I'll put that in chat. By all means, if you want to learn more about portfolios, come to that session. But one thing I want to mention about portfolios, for those of you who aren't exactly sure why a portfolio is so important, the thing about portfolios from a corporate standpoint is it's two things. First, more and more employers are hiring, and I feel like I say this all the time, and I'm going to repeat this until I die. Employers, especially in the private sector, in the corporate world, they want to hire for the skills you have right now. It is becoming less and less important to hire for years of experience or formal education credentials. And that's because I, as a hiring manager, while it's great if you have a master's in education, that's fantastic. Or if you have 20 years of experience in education, that's great. But really, all of that's irrelevant if you can't do what I need you to do right now, which is like, build a really great e-learning course and storyline, or whatever gap that's they're trying to fill on their team. And so the reason a portfolio is so important is it's living evidence of what you can do. Because a resume, only, anyone can put on a resume that they know how to use articulate storyline, but I want to see evidence that you can use articulate storyline, and that's what a portfolio does for you. I don't know, was that your experience, Erica?
Yeah, it's like in the education world, we're so used to having our credentials like speak
Mm-hmm.
for us as far as like getting a job. And instructional design, it's more about your skills
Yeah.
and being able to demonstrate your knowledge and your skills in
Yep.
the field. So, okay, great, you have a master's degree, but what can you do? Like, show me what you got. So,
And it's interesting. The
yeah,
parallel between what we try to do from an instructional design standpoint is no different. I always tell people when I'm teaching instructional design for e-learning or anything, I always make the point that knowledge and behavior or knowledge and ability aren't mutually exclusive. Just because people know things doesn't mean they can't do things. And the same is true when you're hiring, trying to find a really great candidate. Just because they say they know how to do something doesn't mean that they can do it
Right.
or that they're good at it. And that's what a portfolio does. And the last thing I'll mention, and I don't want to take away from too much content from my session that I'm doing next week on portfolios, but with your portfolio, it doesn't need to be everything that you've ever done before. Like for years, my portfolio only had like 2 examples in it. And when I first created my very first portfolio, I remember I put like everything I'd ever done in it. And then I realized people were contacting me for work based off those examples. And then I realized, oh, that's cool. They're contacting me, but I don't know if I want to be hired for that work or to be doing that work. And so your portfolio just really has to be, it showcases what you're really good at and what you want to be hired for. And if that's only 2 examples, that's enough, because most hiring managers are only going to look at a couple examples anyways.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree.
Cool. Okay. So thank you, Justine. That was a great question. Before we take any more questions, I just want to look in chat and see if there's anything going on in chat. I see you're all chatting away. That's fantastic. Yeah. Cool. Keep chatting away. Keep the conversation going while we're talking. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and do another question. Okay. We have another question from Priscilla, and she wants to know, how can you set yourself apart from other applicants? This is a good one. I'll start with this one.
Yeah.
Well, first off, my default answer is have a portfolio. Even though we're just talking about that, you would be amazed. You would be absolutely amazed at how many candidates, because I've been on the side of hiring. In my last job, I hired instructional designers when I was managing instructional design at GoDaddy. You would be amazed at how many people don't have portfolios when they submit their resume. People who've been doing it, who are like experts in instructional design and have been working in the industry for years and years and years. As a hiring manager, the first thing I and this is just me, this is not true of all hiring managers, but the first thing I would do is I'd go look for that link in their portfolio. And if I couldn't find a link to that portfolio, then I'd move on to the next resume that did have one. I always prioritize portfolios above anything else. And I will say, and I wish I don't have the example up right now. Maybe while Erica's talking, I'll look it up to showcase it, or I'll probably show it next week. If you don't have the time to create like an online portfolio, one of the things I used to do before I figured out how to build a website, which was a exercise of trial by fire, figuring out how to build a website. I actually designed my portfolio in PowerPoint. And I actually had it printed into this little booklet. And I would take my portfolio examples, which were built in Articulate Studio at the time, and I would burn them to a CD, and I'd bring that to the interview. And it was like a little printed portfolio with something that they could, go and look at my examples. And it was like the one thing that they could walk away with and go, oh yeah, Tim did that really cool thing. And it showcases design skills and how creative. Nobody else ever did that. That's how I'd set myself apart. I don't know, Erica, if you have an answer to that.
I did a couple of things, and it was risky, but I remember at one point I really wasn't getting nibbles, and I still was like, okay, now what do I do? Okay, I got my portfolio, I've got my resume. I'm starting to get a little bit, but nothing's really like hooking in. How can I do this? And so I was like, all right, my cover letter. It's got to be something different. So the traditional cover letter, I was reading it. I'm like, I'm bored reading it. Recruiters are probably bored reading it. Like, how can I make my cover letter stand out? And I wrote this thing, like, it was just literally like, dear hiring manager, here are 6 reasons why you should hire me. And
I love that.
And it was fun.
Awesome.
It was all about like my other personal skills. Like, I'm a woodworker, so I related that to instructional design. And I also made a 1-minute video pulling out like 4 of those, called 4 Reasons Why You Should Hire Me. And it showed me as my personality side. It showed me who I was beyond an instructional designer as well, but I connected everything back to instructional design. And I think that's when things like people started commenting, like they loved the video, they could watch it. It was 1 minute long, and the letter. And I started to get a little bit more nibbles from that point on. And then for the job I got, I had a really great interview process. They didn't ask me to come to the table and make something new for them. They said, just show, like, bring something and show us, walk us through something you've already made. And I thought that was like really refreshing, because everything else was like, here's your homework and you have to do this.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I took one of my portfolio samples and I personalized it to that company.
Oh, I love that.
And so I took that piece, I made it for that company. I also kind of made an interactive, I went to their webpage and dug into like the source code to change it. So it was like my portfolio, but on their webpage. And so it looked really cool. And then you could screenshot it, and then you could add like hot buttons. So it like links out to things. So I think that really also helped me kind of set myself apart from the other candidates.
I love that. Especially the cover letter tip, because most cover letters are just so like copy and paste.
If you're bored reading it, you're bored reading it. Like,
and that would like so brighten my day to have a cool, kind of funny, quirky cover letter come in as an applicant. Like that would totally get my attention. I love that tip. One other thing I'll mention, and this is less about portfolios or resumes or cover letters, but one thing that I think is really critical, and at least has worked in my experience applying and interviewing for jobs, and even when I'm talking with candidates now that I freelance full time, is one easy way to set yourself apart is to ask a ton of questions. Yeah. Every interview I've ever done, like I really dig into asking questions, not only because people love talking about themselves, and if you could get the people on the other end of the table to talk about themselves, they'll think, they'll like you because they get to talk about themselves, but B, because it shows interest in the job, and you're also wanting to make sure it's the right fit for you.
Exactly.
And so with my last job, when I was interviewing at GoDaddy, this was back in 2016, I remember my very, very final interview. I had a good feeling that it was going to be like the blessing interview where I thought I was going to get the offer. And I still had tons of questions. I was unsure about whether or not I wanted the job. And so the recruiter called me and he's like, hey, we're just going to set you up for a quick 15-minute thing with the VP, and, we'll wrap some things up. And I remember going, no. Can we do like an hour and a half? I have questions. And at first the recruiter was a little bit, I think he was put off by it because he had to go tell the VP that I wanted an hour and a half. But the conversation that I had during that hour and a half with that VP was so good because I really had the opportunity to dig into the nitty-gritty of what I was about to get into, and they really appreciated that. So ask questions.
That is awesome. Yeah. I agree. Questions. I always had this, I have this question sheet that I've shared with some people that I would use every time I was preparing for an interview, of like, one, preparing for the questions that they might ask me, and two, the questions I want to ask them. Like, it's a two-way street. You want to make sure you want to work there. And I think that was also a mistake I made, was I was applying for everything and anything. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a focus. I didn't really know what kind of company I wanted to work in or an environment. And when I started to sit back and reflect on, where would I be happy? Like, mm-hmm. where would I be happy? What kind of company do I want to work for? And I realized that a company that aligned with my values was like top. Like, I wanted a company that I felt I could be proud to work for, and I could be proud to share that I work there, and that really aligned with my own values was key. And I landed that. I got that company. I feel really happy about where I am.
Yeah, and I know this isn't related to Priscilla's question, but I'm going to mention it nonetheless. I think one of the things you want to do when you're interviewing and applying, as hard as it may be, because you're probably, if you don't have a job and you're desperate to get a job, or you're desperate to get out of teaching, or whatever your situation is, you don't want to go into an interview desperate or feeling desperate. Like, as much as you have to fake it like you don't need that job. And it shifts the power dynamic, and it's less about please hire me, and it's more about, are we a good fit for each other? And I'll go back to the GoDaddy example. When I interviewed for the job at GoDaddy, it was to manage an e-learning team, and it was about going back to corporate America. And I knew I didn't want to manage a team, and I really was hesitant about corporate America going back into it. But I knew it offered really good experience for me for the longevity of my career. And so one of the things I went into with this mantra in my mind, I said to myself, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go into that interview and I'm going to be really honest about what I want, what I don't want, who I am, and if they still want me after all of that, then Yahtzee, it's a good fit for me. And I remember telling my in that hour and a half Q&A I had with the hiring manager, the VP of learning at the time, I remember telling him, I'm like, I'm not going to retire from this company. I'm planning on freelancing in the future. I speak at conferences. I'm working on a book. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm not going to give those things up for you.
Good for you. Yeah, you have to be your authentic
Yeah,
self.
right. You
Yeah.
have to be. And it's
Yeah.
so much more freeing because then you're not having to live up to whatever facade you created for that person, right?
Exactly. I
Yes.
agree. I
So,
agree. I feel like that's the approach I started to take as well, and it worked out the way I was hoping it would. So
yeah.
I'm really happy, you know.
Yeah. And it's hard when you're desperate for a job. It's so hard to be in that mindset. But
Yeah,
the sooner you get yourself there, the sooner you're going to land somewhere where you really, really, really want to be.
exactly.
So,
I was lucky enough that I still had my job. And I, even though I was like not happy, I really wanted out. I still knew that I can hold out for that one job, that job that really speaks to me, and that I know I'm going to be happy. Because the worst thing is to leap from one job that you're unhappy at to another job that you're going to be unhappy at. So I held out, even though it was really, really hard sometimes to just be like, nope, stick it out. It's going to
yep.
happen. It's going to happen. And I had a lot of people, I had a lot of mentors and people on my side that were just like, you've got this, you're doing all the right things, it's going to happen. Like, keep encouraging me to go, because job searching and applying for jobs and interviews are exhausting.
It's so exhausting.
It's so hard to keep the momentum going. There was a couple times where I had some devastating like rejections, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to take this week off. I'm just going to regroup. I'm going to mentally get back in the game in a week. And I had to
Yep.
do that. I just had to take a break every once in a while. And you have to take care of yourself too.
You do. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's definitely, that's a challenge. You get in your own head,
You do.
and then you wonder whether or not you're doing the right things. I'm there. I'm there every day sometimes. All
Yeah.
right. um, okay, let's do another question. Let's go down. I don't want to. Obviously, people have been upvoting questions. That's great, but I want to give some attention to some of the questions that maybe didn't get upvoted. So let's do. Sorry, my contacts are going like haywire, so it's making it hard to read. How do you handle? Why don't you, Erica? Why don't you pick a question out? Tell me which one you want to answer.
Okay. Let's see. There's one about curriculum development and good stepping stones to ID.
Are you
That
able to hit the record answer button? Is there a little link that says record answer under there button?
No, there
Okay.
isn't. It's the one. It's the second from the
Melissa.
top right now.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
do that one. So Melissa wants to know, in a role in curriculum development, a good stepping stone to ID. Is a role in curriculum development a good stepping stone to ID? That's the question?
Yeah.
Okay, go right ahead.
Yeah. If uh, I think there are curriculum development. So I know there's a lot of curriculum development jobs for companies that still are working with the education sector. So that's a stepping stone if you feel you're not quite ready for like deep corporate. There's a lot of ed tech companies out there that are looking for people to do this work. There's also like training and development. There's other jobs inside of learning and development. There's training. You can be a corporate trainer. That's another good stepping stone. And I had thought about that, but that was where I came to this like reflection of like, what do I really want to do? And I was like, no, I really want to be an instructional designer. Like, that's what I want to do. So I kind of like did away with all that other options and really focused myself on just instructional design and what kind of instructional
So
designer I
Erica, so when you say curriculum development and when Melissa says curriculum development, clearly you're referring to something different than instructional design, because in my mind, I'm like, that's the same thing as instructional design. So
I,
how is curriculum development
you
different
know,
in your world?
they're pretty much the same thing. I think they just they're very, I don't know. That's a good question. I often see curriculum development jobs more for like ed tech companies versus instructional
Sure,
designers, I guess.
I get that.
Companies that are attached to the education field, and maybe that's why they call them curriculum developers, because they're trying to attract educators.
I see.
But in my, I'd have to read some of the job descriptions, but it might be just mapping out, not the full development of it, but mapping out how a learning path should be, or what kind of, mapping out coursework for educators, or learning programs that are online. Maybe not going fully deep into the actual creation of the content.
So that's a really great point, because I think that it just illustrates exactly one of the misalignments or misconceptions about what it means to be an instructional designer in some organizations. And this is how it was when I managed my team at GoDaddy. We had a very distinct difference between people who are instructional designers versus instructional developers. And so,
Oh,
when what you just described as a
yeah.
curriculum developer or designer is what I oftentimes is for some people what it means to be an instructional designer. You're designing the
Okay.
program, but you might have other people developing the program,
Yeah.
creating the program. And so I think a lot of times people conflate what it means to design versus develop, especially when you think of like the ADDIE model.
Yep.
Design is just outlining what you said, like the learning path. There's going to be a job aid, and then maybe there's going to be an ILT, and maybe an e-learning. But it doesn't mean that you're necessarily creating those. Usually that goes to a developer, and sometimes that's the same person. But oftentimes they're not always the same person. And so,
Right.
to that question, Melissa,
That's a good, yeah.
so to that question, you could call yourself, if you wanted to like stretch that term, you could call yourself an instructional and curriculum developer. If you wanted to throw in one of those corporate words, I'd say those aren't far off from being the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a good one from Amanda. Were
Yeah.
you teaching when you got your ID job? Did you walk away from teaching in October? And was your district okay with that? I'm struggling with leaving mid-year. Amanda,
I'm gonna have my smoothie. I don't know
yeah,
the answer to that, so go ahead, Erica.
girl. Okay. I had that teacher guilt. We are so ingrained at teachers that once the school year starts, we're not allowed to leave. But the corporate world doesn't work on that timeline.
No.
So I had to have people coach me through that, because it was so, so hard for me to start the school year and still continue to work at looking for a job. And I had people just say, no, you are worth getting that new job. You deserve to work for a company that pays you better. You deserve to work remotely. You you know the education world and the corporate world don't match up on timelines, and that's okay. And so I was really scared when I got the job offer. I was like, this is gonna be really hard. So and I had asked some support from my former employer, and they were like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, that's what I had talked about instructional design a lot, and was really trying to implement some of the best practices in my that job. And my boss was like, I will never discourage anyone who goes off and improves their career. Like, I think that's great. um but I have heard of other people, like, some states will revoke your license or fine you, and
Oh
it's
my gosh,
terrible. So
that's
what if they take your
horrible.
license away? Then you can be like, good, I'm not going back, right? So um I was lucky in the sense I was not a classroom teacher, so they didn't have to find a replacement for me before I left. And they still haven't found a replacement for me. um but I do know other people who left directly from the classroom. And they negotiated the time. They negotiated a start. So, knowing that it was they wanted to provide more time for the district or the school to find a replacement for them. So they're not leaving their students high and dry, or at least a suitable long-term sub. And so they were able to negotiate a longer period before they started their job.
That's fascinating. So,
Mhm.
one of the things, I've never worked in a classroom, I've never been a teacher, but in my corporate private sector mindset, I've left jobs, and you hear countless stories like this where you get a new job and then you put in your notice with your current employer, and their attitude towards you totally shifts, and they're passive aggressive and nasty about it. And whenever that happens, the thing I always tell people is that's just affirmation that you made the right decision.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
that's how they treat you because you're bettering yourself, then you shouldn't have ever been there in the first place. They
Yeah.
really didn't care about you then.
Yeah.
And you always want to give them, to your point, like work with them and try to partner on a timeline, an exit strategy. And if they're willing to do that, fantastic.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about, that corporate job or whatever job they want you right away. If they've already offered you the job, and that means they want you, and they're going to move heaven and earth to make sure that they can secure you, even if that means they have to wait an extra few weeks or a month before you start. I've never lost an opportunity because I said, hey, I have to give my current employer a month's notice, and I need you to
Right.
respect that. And most corporate organizations are going to go, that's why we want to hire this person, because they have integrity to their current employer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this, Erica. So when they say like revoke your license, is that something they do because it's part of your contract? I mean, when you sign a contract, do you have the option to terminate it whenever you want, or do they have the option? How does that
It's
work?
yeah, it's so some states have laws where the superintendent can petition the state to revoke your license if you break contract after a certain date. Like I know in my the teacher contract in my district, there was some language in there like if you leave after like August 1st, then you have to pay for the fees to like post your job and hire someone.
That's
They
crazy.
never, I never witnessed them ever doing that because, you could fight back and then it's a legal suit and then, they're spending more money fighting that. But in my district, they never went after people like that. But I have heard that it's possible and they can. I mean, it's silly. To me, it's kind of silly. Like no other sector does this to their employees, like where they totally blacklist you if you decide to like go and improve your life in that career field. Like it's just mind blowing how the regulations and the rules are so different for teachers and the rest of the world. It just doesn't seem fair.
That's off. Like you have to
No.
buy your own supplies and then pay to have that just blows my
Oh
mind.
yeah. Yeah.
In the corporate world, one of the things I think a lot of people get surprised by is oftentimes, depending on your job and the organization, if you're leaving for a competitor, there's times where you put in your 2 weeks and then they walk you out the door that day, and because of, you're going to a
Right.
competitor, or they give you a non-compete. But I've never heard of anything so extreme as that. That's horrible.
So extreme. Yeah. My state, they don't revoke licenses based on that. So I knew that wasn't gonna happen, but I didn't actually care. Like I was like, fine, take my license. Like I'm so done with education right now. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's crazy. I'm blown
Yeah.
away by that.
It is crazy.
All right, let's do I like this question from is it Shani? I apologize if I'm totally butchering your name. It's the third one down. Let's go ahead and do that one. So Shani wants to know, how tech-minded do you really need to be an amazing ID? Can I focus more on the learning side and the tech side rather than the tech side, and still do a great job? I have thoughts on that, but Erica, I don't know if you have a particular thought
Yeah.
on that first.
I think it's very important. Especially now we're remote and all training is pretty remote right now, like e-learning, or they're doing training over Zoom or anything like that. Even if you're just a designer and you're not doing the developing part, knowing what the developers use and the tools and how they use the tools is really important. I think, and maybe Tim, you're right, I think it's a very tech heavy focused field. Even the tools we use within my company to share information and documents and communicate with each other, it's just so tech centric because we're all remote right now.
Yeah.
And you have to be comfortable with figuring out unknown things, and especially with technology, you have to be comfortable with just diving in and doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I'll tell you why. So, if you were to go back 15 years or so, if you wanted to create an e-learning course, you might have an instructional designer who might create a storyboard, but you had to pass it off to somebody who actually knew how to code and engineer a course, because that's how those tools worked. But recently, within the last 10 years or so, all of the tools that we use nowadays, tools like Articulate Storyline or Rise or even learning management systems, you don't have to know any code, right? I don't know how to code. If I had to code something, like I could edit some HTML if I needed to, but like if I had to code to save my life, I would just die. I would just go, I'm gone because I can't code. And I don't want to code. And so because the tools are becoming easier and more accessible for people to use, I mean, Storyline is really just PowerPoint on steroids.
And then there's Rise, which is
even easier, right? Because those tools are becoming easier, more and more employers are expecting people to have broad experience. And I've talked about this before. More employers want what's called a T-shaped employee. And what a T-shaped employee is somebody who has broad ability, but deep expertise in a particular thing. So to your question, I apologize, Shani, if I'm getting your name wrong, but what employers want is you want to be able to say, I can do these things if you need me to. Like I can manage projects, I can manage stakeholders, I can write a storyboard or develop an e-learning course or create a participant guide for an ILT or implement or measure success or do a little bit in LMS. I can do all of those things, but my expertise is here in the instructional design part. And so you want to be able to have broad ability, but deep expertise. That's my take on it. Yeah.
That's a good advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Awesome question. All right. Let's see what's going on in chat real quickly before we take on a few more questions. I see more questions coming into chat.
Oh, there's some good chat stuff. I can't wait to
read
through.
I know. Districts can be petty, Matt says. That's awful. That just blows my mind. I mean, all organizations can be petty, but I had no idea about that. Okay. We have a little more than 10 minutes left, so let's see if we can get a last couple of questions in. Let's do Justine's one at the top. Justine says, how many jobs did you apply before you got the interview and the offer?
Too many to count, Justine. I applied for a lot of jobs. Gosh, yeah, I applied for a lot of jobs, and I don't even know how to count it. It was definitely over 100 for sure. And then when I started to really focus myself and think about what kind of a company I wanted to work in and the kind of role I wanted to be in, and really tweaking my resume and portfolio to match that. And how many, let's see, I started to get I felt like I was starting to get a lot of recruiter calls, and I had the recruiter call down. Like I was in with recruiters, and then it was like the next phase was like, okay, how do I get in with the hiring managers? Because that's the next step. And I took every phone call and interview with someone as a learning experience. Like I would get off the phone, I would reflect, like, what did I do well? Where could I work on? They were asking this question, and now I realize they were looking for this answer. Like you'll figure it out. And every time I went into an interview, I got a little bit better. Yep. And so I actually appreciate that I had those opportunities. It was like practice for the real thing, right? Because by the time I got to the interview phase with the company I got hired for, I felt like I was much more comfortable. I knew what I wanted to say. I knew how I could sell myself, and I actually got 2 job offers at the same time. So like I never expected that to happen. And here I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Like 2 people, like and they were both really good job offers, but I ultimately went with the company that I felt aligned with my values, that I felt most connected to as far as the hiring manager and the team I was going to go on. It just felt like a better fit for me. And I'm so glad I did that. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, this doesn't directly relate to Justine's question, but you kind of touched on this. I used to dread interviews long time ago. I used to dread them. I get so nervous. And I have this, I have this mantra about you have to learn to get comfortable outside your comfort zone, no matter what
Yes.
the situation is.
Get comfortable with the uncomfortable is my
Right.
mantra.
Yes, because that's where you grow. And I can sense, I know when I'm having that oh crap moment that I feel like I'm outside my comfort zone and you want to run back to your comfort zone, right? And one of the things I've learned to do is you have to embrace that. And I have this, I do this thing to myself. It's a kind of a mental trick that if it's something that I'm dreading because I don't feel confident about it or I don't feel good enough, I put myself in a situation where I'm like, I'm going to learn to love this. I'm going to do it so much that I learn to love it.
Yes. Yes.
And I now, like, uh, I haven't had to do interviews in a while because I have my own business, but I interview with clients. But by the time when my last job and the one before that, I learned to love interviewing because I went into it to your point, like, what can I learn from this experience? And let's have
Yeah.
a great conversation. And I love interviewing now. And you just have to you have to really embrace being outside your comfort zone. That's where growth
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. There was actually there was one interview at least that uh I was like, I kind of took myself out. I was like, you know what? I know someone else that would be a better fit. And I helped them match with someone else. And
That's
that
awesome.
person works at that company. Like you just, yeah, if you know who you are and what
Mhm.
you want and, um, know your worth is really important, teachers. Like we are often undervalued in our careers. And so making the leap to corporate, we think that's how much we can only make. And that's not true. Like you are valued so much more. And being able to reach for that goal, make a goal for yourself and don't undersell yourself unless you really need a job now, right? So like
Right.
getting your foot in the door in the corporate environment with this as a stepping stone, knowing that this is not your permanent place. Like this is just for right now until you get to that place.
Yeah.
Think of it that way.
Yeah, all those things are temporary, and as long as you keep working towards it, yeah, you might have to take a job that's not your dream job, but that's temporary, and then start working. I also, one of the things I do, and I did this when I was still working full time, I would always put myself in the mindset of, like, once I got a job, like when I got the job at GoDaddy, I was there for 2.5 years. I spent those 2.5 years thinking about what I'm going to do after GoDaddy. Like you have to,
Mm,
you have to like really own, like, because you're not going to retire. I wasn't going to retire from GoDaddy. Nobody stays 40 years at a company anymore and retires from it. And so be honest about it. Like you're going to leave the company wherever you're working, Erica. And I know you have your boss and your other coworkers on there. You're probably not going to retire from that company. You
who
want
knows,
to,
right?
right? Yeah, you might, who knows, but you probably won't. And that's okay to admit that and plan for your future, because the company is going to plan for their future. Why not
Yeah.
you? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
but hopefully you do retire from that company, and maybe you'll be the exception to the rule. So
I love it right now. And that's what I say. Like, if you're happy where you're at, continue
yeah,
and find that place that really loves keeping you around, I guess. Right. So right now, all I know is I'm really happy where I'm at. I'm continuing on, and that's the way it's going to go. So
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, and we can do a few more questions, we have about 7 minutes left. If anyone has to leave at the top of the hour, first I want to thank you all so much for attending. This was a fantastic conversation with Erica, and I appreciate everything you've done to contribute to this fantastic conversation. I always close with this. For any of you out there who are looking to make the move into instructional design or e-learning, I'll make this quick because I hate doing my little pitches here. By all means, feel free to check out the eLearning Designers Academy, and I'll put the thing in chat there. Our enrollment opens May 4th, and that's a great place to learn instructional design, portfolios, getting a job. Feel free to check that out, and you can join the wait list. Okay, so let's do one more question before we wrap up. Does it sound good, Erica?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do, we did Justine's question. We talked a little bit about portfolios. Like I said, we have the session next week on portfolios. I like Shanti's and Elizabeth's. Let me look at those. How did you handle varying opinions? How are career breaks viewed in ID? I'm currently a state. Okay, let's do that one. I like that one. Elizabeth asks.
Which, can you read that one?
Yeah, Elizabeth wants to know, how are career breaks viewed in ID? I'm currently a stay-at-home parent, and I'm worried that I wouldn't be taken seriously as a candidate since I've been out of the workforce for 2 years. Here's my take on this. Any employer that you would want to work with is going to be understanding of your career break if you can explain it that you're a parent. If they were to judge you for that, that's probably not a place you're going to work at anyways.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a really hard, like to be judgmental on when so many people have lost their jobs in COVID, especially. Yeah, I agree. If they're judging you on that, then you probably don't want to work there.
Right, because it's an indicator of how they'll treat you in the future when your child's sick, or if you get sick, or anything, or when you want to take vacation. Yeah. And so for me, it's, how is it judged? It's judged differently. Most organizations, the culture of the organization is going to be accepting of it because that's what the organization says. You're not really worried about that. It's about that hiring manager. And that's the person you need to get along with. So my recommendation is be honest and just explain it. Like, I had a kid. That's worthy of a career break, in my opinion. Yeah. And if that person doesn't understand it, well, gosh, I don't know. They probably shouldn't be managing people, and you probably don't want to be working for them anyways. That's my take on that.
That's a good point.
I don't know. Would you agree with that, Erica?
I would agree with that.
And that's that whole attitude. Like, that's that attitude. That's this attitude that I have within the last couple of years. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm getting into my mid-30s where I just don't care anymore. But like, not that I don't care anymore. It's like I just don't care about like the BS that we project onto ourselves. Like, no, like you're allowed to have you deserve to be treated better. You made a freaking human being. You can have some time off from work. In Germany, did you know I managed somebody when I was at GoDaddy? I managed somebody.
Oh, is that the place that they have like a year?
They have 2 years. They get 2 years off. Mothers get 2 years off. And that's like, that's fantastic.
We can't even get our stuff together to.
You get time to shower and get back to the office. You know what I mean?
Right.
Oh, okay. I know there's tons of questions we didn't get to tackle today. By all means, feel free to reach out to Erica on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me if you want to continue asking questions. Before we close out, Erica, where can people learn about you, find you, connect with you, all of that?
Sure. I think the easiest way is to just go and find me on LinkedIn. My name is Erica Zimmer. And I'm on there. So connect with me there. I would love to connect with everyone and, help out anyone that's, wants some advice or help or anything. I feel very strongly to pay it forward, and I got a lot of support, and I just love being able to pay that forward and help others through the process.
That's awesome. Yes. And I would encourage anyone else out there, you never know when you might be someone else's expert, mentor, guide. So even if you don't feel like you have a lot to share, I promise there's somebody out there who can learn from it. So, it doesn't take a lot of effort to put yourself out there and help others. And then, of course, you can reach out to people like myself, Erica, and anyone else out there. But otherwise, thank you all for attending. And until next time, I'll see you all around. Thanks, Erica.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.